Hi, Brittany. Really nice to welcome you today to our first ever episode of the Money Flows podcast. By way of a quick introduction, my name is Anna Zeitlin. I'm a partner at AG. I'm leading the FinTech and Financial Services practice. Brittany, we've been longtime friends, but perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. Brittany McDonough. I am a longtime UAE resident and very excited to be here for the podcast. I was most recently the head of innovation with the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, left over the summer, and we have a lot of overarching work now in the fintech space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really exciting actually for me to have seen your career grow. Obviously, you started out in the US, you spent considerable time here in the Middle East, so you have a real deep understanding of both business in the US and in the UAE. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about your career journey to date, and then we can deep dive into some of the projects that you're getting into at the moment.
For sure. So I started working here because of a trade mission in 2014. So I was in the governor's office. At the time, it was Governor Patrick in Massachusetts. And there was the launch of the direct flight from Dubai to Boston. So really in honor of that new economic relationship, the governor's office organized a trade mission here with primarily folks in the financial and health space. There were already a lot of sovereign wealth engagements in Boston, and the academic spaces for sure between Harvard, MIT, et cetera. So we were here for a good amount of time, and it was actually a very fun first visit. It was June, so it was a casual 120 degrees. And 25 to 30 professionals that are all, C-suite or, the governor himself. So it was always interesting moving through Abu Dhabi, then driving down to Dubai. And really from that first trip here, I loved it. And then there was a ton of opportunity. That was the year that Dubai was awarded Expo 2020. So there were signs everywhere. There was a lot of excitement about what Expo 2020 would do for the city. So that was 2014, and I was in government, remained in government, and then moved over to a startup accelerator and led international programs for the accelerator. So was very happy to be able to spend time learning about ecosystems, how innovation and entrepreneurship drive economic growth on a regional level, but really on a local level, and what that means overall for economies when they're trying to diversify. And that then again brought me back to Dubai. So we had a partnership with the Dubai Future Foundation, and the work that they were doing was great for our startups. There was a great entry point for companies, and there was the conversations around where the UAE would go in this startup space. Then fast forward another 7 years, and Abu Dhabi signed the agreement with AWS and Amazon. I was at Stanford at the time with StartX, working on their partnerships, and they needed someone that had been in the intersection of government, tech, and innovation, which is a kind of unique place to be. In a very, very fun way, you're able to check boxes when it comes to making sure that all of our regulations are sorted and all of our licenses are there, but then also making sure that the private sector can be involved and can support companies being able to tap into resources. So that's what brought me here, and now here we are.
Incredible. I mean, it's such a journey, and some really, really big names on your CV along the way. What made you finally make the leap from living in the US to coming to the UAE on a more permanent basis?
There were three primary things. One, there is a unique moment in time here in the UAE, and going back, 2.5, 3 years ago, where all of these agreements were being signed. Audio had just been created, so the Abu Dhabi Investment Office is responsible for foreign direct investment into Abu Dhabi. So it was a real vehicle and a partner for the private sector to be supported in a intentional way around 5 to 10 year long partnerships, using rebate subsidies, different kind of schemes that are very common in government support services to empower companies to be here. But you're seeing in real time the development of an ecosystem. Yeah. That is super exciting. So being at the forefront of what these programs can offer, and that was what first made me think this is a really great opportunity to be here and then plant a flag and stay.
So totally see that, actually. I mean, we're doing a lot of work with financial services clients, but those particularly in the blockchain industry, the virtual assets industry, and we're seeing a true birth of an ecosystem here at the moment, and it's very exciting, both from a legal perspective where we're helping a lot of clients shape the regulation and lobby the authorities to grow that regulation to meet their business models, but also just to see the flourishing of all of the seeds of hard work that have been planted over the last few years in the UAE. So perhaps you can tell us a bit more about what you were doing for Adia and your innovation role and what kind of companies you were involved with during that time.
Sure. So I love working for the government. Folks might not think it's the most exciting thing to do, but genuinely, when I was in Massachusetts or even working as a more or less a vendor for regional governments for their programs, you're able to kind of be at the center of what's happening and you're able to implement some type of overall growth strategy. So I was privileged really to work with these global organizations. So there was Amazon and AWS. AWS built a data center in Abu Dhabi. That unlocked opportunities for startups to be able to actually have sovereign data and to be able to be based here. So for larger organizations or for scale-ups that were built on AWS, whether from the US or Europe or wherever they might have been located, they were now able to do that work here. So that opened a channel for startups that otherwise wouldn't have been able to really flourish in the UAE as if they were at their home office and at their headquarters. We have a great program at Siemens Energy, or rather I should say, Audio has a great program at Siemens Energy.
You've only recently left.
Yes. And the Siemens Energy team is absolutely incredible. They are very intentional with the work that they're doing and making sure that they're really bridging the gap between energy, the private sector, and really youth engagement and the future of innovation. So they have an apprenticeship program, which is not really common here in the Middle East region. It's not common really in the US either, but it's very, very common in Germany to have these apprenticeship programs. And looking at the growth of the ecosystem, you need talent. You need folks that are able to be at every point of a value chain. And this apprenticeship program does a lot of that kind of foundational work. They had a number of engagements during COP28. So as the head of innovation, I was also able to be part of our accelerator strategy. So we had an engagement with Plug and Play, Microsoft, working with Angel Z, which is an early childhood authority program focused on youth development and bringing really leading technologies to Abu Dhabi to support children before they're 6 years old. And there's a number of really great companies that were working with children of determination, which is such a space where technology and really medical devices can be a support for children that need a resource. And the program is able to kind of bridge that gap between companies that have been doing work for long periods of time abroad and bring it here and pilot directly. So I was able to kind of really be in the center of all these things. We had a COP28 accelerator with Microsoft that brought 12 companies to the UAE for almost 2 weeks, and we actually had our pitch day at COP. So very exciting things that bring companies in. It was all about commercial engagements, right? So doing these programs, just to say you've done them, doesn't matter. Like everyone has an accelerator. There's hundreds of programs a year all over the world, but you need to be able to bring companies here and have that broker that's in between government, quasi-government, and then looking at licensing. And so how can they actually have their company thrive? And not saying that, there's no perfect system, but going through an accelerator is usually a really good way to do that because you're then brought in front of those leaders directly.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, we have a lot of companies who are coming to us entering the region for the first time and feel often surprised at some of the nuances in terms of operating and getting set up here. And I think that that's so much of a part of our job as lawyers to guide them through that legal and regulatory process. But of course, there are lots of business aspects to that move as well. Perhaps you can shed some light on some of the main differences that companies that you've worked with have experienced in, let's say, operating in the US versus operating in the Emirates?
There's a ton of differences. So if I wanted to right now, you and I during this podcast could literally go onto a website and open up an LLC in Delaware almost in the time it will take for us to have the conversation and for the wonderful team of talented folks here to edit it and get it online, right? During that period, you could literally have an LLC open in Delaware. Here, it just takes much more time, which the timing, I had a company say this to me, the process isn't hard, you just have to have a plan. And not everyone, but a lot of folks will say that doing business in a new market can be really hard, but it's because they don't have a plan or they don't have insight into the duration of the processes for licensing and then bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did in the government side, but what I as an individual do, is help organizations and individuals set up these plans. So knowing that you're going to need, 3 to 4 months to work with one of the free trade zones, then you'll need another 4 weeks to 8 weeks, possibly more, for bank accounts. As long as you as an executive team can make those evaluations, and then you have your burn and know what it's going to be, that's fine. It's just you need to know how to do it. So coming with a mindset that especially on the innovation side, right? You have a lot of like VCs they move really fast. They decide whether or not they're going to invest in a company, and then they sell a company $50,000, right? For like an angel or for a safe. So meaning they see something, money's there, done in like a month or less. That is not the process here. And that's not a bad thing. It's just you need to know how to do it.
Thanks for your insights about timing. Definitely is something that a lot of our clients who are completely new to the region find surprising at times. I think clients who have already existed in the region in some capacity expect certain longer time frames, but even they can get frustrated with some of these points. I mean, another point that we have certainly had to manage expectations on are cultural differences. I had a call with an incredible American fund manager this morning, really significant entity in the US, and they were interested to hear more about what's expected in terms of face-to-face time or presentation of certain C-suite members in front of the authorities. And I think that that's another really important point. Is that something that your startups have dealt with as well?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I always say to founders and to funds that I work with is, if you're not here, you're not here. So if someone can't ring you and see you, or if going to the same networking event, so ADGM has links once a month, if you're not there in a familiar face, then you're like a stranger. And people here are here as in not just Emirati folks, but really doing work across the region. Like working with people they consider to be friends. And the US is famous for separating business and personal life. Here, it's much more porous. So I heard a really fun phrase. It's a 9 coffee rule. So I hadn't heard the 9 before, but essentially it's saying, don't ask someone for a favor unless you've had 9 coffees with them. And the amount of time that takes to be able to really build a relationship, that should be the amount of time that you spend with a person in their personal and professional capacity to be able to leverage that relationship for your own gain. And the way that I used to say it years ago is, you never network when you need something. So it really should be that you're wanting to provide value, you're wanting to make a meaningful connection and a real relationship, and then see where you can be helpful to them and vice versa. And I think here, as in whether it's in ADGM or DAFC, people are very generous with their time, with their connections, with their insight and feedback. Sometimes as a company, feedback to your product and where it fits into the market could be one of the most valuable things, because you could be running down a path where you've seen great success, whether it's in the US or in Europe or even the Far East. You've seen a business unit really thrive. You bring that same exact product here, there's really no customer. So you have a solution with no problem. So having the conversations with folks just at a high level about, would you use this? Is this relevant? Is this product something that you think is going to be helpful to clients that you work with? Those types of conversations mean the world to companies, because you can save yourself a year of trouble when you actually don't have a position here for that particular product. But then there's something that can be a much better fit that you operate on.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree with you more. I think something that I've noticed, and I've been here for 11 and a half years, is that relationships I made when I first came to the Emirates are now paying off almost a decade later. And I really subscribe to that same school of thought, that you should be absolutely networking, not because you need something or you want something, but actually because you are genuinely looking to grow your relationships within the region. And I think also you made an interesting point about people being generous with time here. I have to say, completely agree with you. I spent probably a couple of hours last week sitting down with one of the regulators from the FSRA, looking at how a client of ours has a very new, innovative idea that simply just doesn't fit within their regulatory regime. And the regulator made time for me to come sit down and discuss how we can fit within parts of their regime, how we can perhaps lobby for change in other parts of their regime. I just don't think that would happen elsewhere in the world. Certainly wouldn't happen in the UK. I don't think it would happen in the US either. So it's a unique opportunity that we have in this region to foster those relationships.
On the regulator point, I admire both ADGM, VARA, the folks that are responsible for the growth of this Web3 cluster. They take this role so seriously as something that they care about, and they see a legacy in making the UAE the home really for Web3 and crypto. Being able to interface with the regulator and have a conversation about what fits, what doesn't, changes the way that a scale-up startup is able to then build their business and grow their team. And when your burn rate is maybe, let's say, 35,000 US a month, that's very, very low for a US startup. But if your company was founded, whether it's the GCC or wherever it might be, that's actually a ton of money that you might not be interested in spending for months and months on end when you have no insight into what the regulator will do. Being able to go directly to them, I think, is a game changer for companies. And that's what's, I think, beckoning a lot of these companies here. You have a lot of strong events that are advocating for this conversational point and bringing in regulators and founders and investors together. Yeah. So the Solana Foundation has their Founders Villa. Very cool. They've done two cohorts. They are going to end up doing another one. They bring all of the founders together. They literally are in 6 different homes, and they have like a courtyard. So it's great exposure for the founders. Solana as an organization is able to kind of be that glue that's holding part of the cluster together, which is awesome. And it's a way for, if you're in the space, you know where to go. Next week, there is the Binance event, and that brings in a ton of people. But so I am a columnist for The Circuit, and The Circuit lists out all of these events, and there's always going to be a strategy needed when you're attending something like this because they are just overwhelming. So GITEX was last week, and there was 120,000 people in the city.
Yeah, we felt the traffic.
Yeah, exactly. That's just insane. Like, that's the size of like an actual like small city, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of places. So when you're going to an event, I used to actually, years ago, I used to run a networking workshop for our new hires. And there's literally a map on how to go to a networking event. So you should know who the sponsor is. You should know why you are going there. And even if you're going there and your answer is because I want to meet new people, awesome. But know that that's your answer. If your answer is I'm going there because I want to meet this one person, just go to meet that one person and then skedaddle unless there is something that's going to be helpful to you. But you need to have like a real strategy for these events because otherwise you'll get completely lost and overwhelmed and you'll feel like you maybe have wasted your time because you were in a room with 500 people and, you know, stood by the crudité board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are literally thousands of events now going on in the UAE, and it feels like people fly in not just from around the region, but actually from around the world to attend these events. They're incredible. But what some of our clients find, and I imagine what some of the companies that you've worked with have found, is that it's quite difficult to tell which events are most appropriate, which are the good quality events, which are maybe worth passing up on. Do you have any advice or any perspective on that?
There's 2 pieces of advice that I usually give is one, go hyper industry specific. So if you are in the life science space, yes, there is a life science component to GITEX, but being here for Arab Health would probably be better because there'll be a critical mass of potential partners, clients, even maybe existing relationships that you have where you can meet with those folks in town for that moment. The other thing is who are the sponsors. So if it is just some like I get events invitations all the time. I mean, thank you, universe. I will take them. But sometimes it's just a kind of like a party for a party's sake. And knowing the difference between a party and a professional event, I think that is what the clarity you often will need. I love a party. Like, that's great to go to those ones for sure. They serve a purpose. But if you're in town for 4 days, you need to know, okay, I'm going to this event for this business purpose, and then you can go to the party ones later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also at these events, it's no secret that there are a huge amount of side meetings that go on. And I think that's really where the business development happens. So I suppose companies looking to come to the region for the first time should be thinking about what sort of meetings they can line up in alongside attending those events.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of really large organizations and kind of institutions that have existed for, ever. Not ever, but a long time. And the rule is that they need to have 9 meetings a day before they get on the plane.
Wow.
So I think that's a pretty decent standard to have, because if you're coming here and you've just kind of, thrown spaghetti on the wall to see if it sticks, that's not going to potentially help you as much as if you had these things lined up. And if you get here and half the meetings fall through, you still have a full day.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, actually. I think there is still an image from the outside looking in that this region is a place where money grows on trees. You don't have to work very hard to sign large contracts or get real sort of deep level market entry without doing too much work. And I think that's probably a false narrative. I think that is potentially what used to happen back in the day, but it's simply not the case anymore. There is a real quality standard, and companies need to demonstrate what they are offering to the region as much as what the region can offer to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was definitely a perspective that people could come here, close a check, and then go back, especially to America.
Yeah.
And that maybe the decision makers weren't as sophisticated as some of the institutions in the US. And I have personally found, especially working in government, it is entirely the opposite. All of the folks in leadership that I've worked for literally went to Ivy League schools. They are very savvy and they want to build the region. And so people that are just in and out are not going to fit in anymore. You need to have a commitment to growing the UAE. And if you're doing business here, you should want to contribute to your own ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really interesting phenomenon that happened after the Abraham Accords were signed between the UAE and Israel. I think Israeli startups presumed that money was going to be handed on a plate to them, and indeed they do have incredible startups with some incredible tech behind them in particular, but there's still an element of having to really present what you can offer before checks are going to be signed and deals are going to be done. It's there's definitely a slight misconception about the region in my opinion.
Yeah.
But what other issues have you seen companies in the region face when they've been coming here? I mean, we've spoken about timing, we've spoken about cultural differences. A large one that we find amongst our client base is expenses. Mm-hmm. What's been your experience with bringing companies to the region from the US? Relatively high cost jurisdiction, but still there can be unexpected expenses along the way.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest cost centers for a company is around talent. Right. And if you're starting a company here and you're building, years 1 through 5, you need to have the best team possible. So there are going to be expenses related to acquiring that talent, maybe moving them over, setting folks up. That is an expense that needs to be built in from the strategy at the very beginning. Because then a lot of times what happens is you're year 2 or 3 or what have you, and then you're finding that your staff cost is double what you might have been anticipating. So expenses when it comes to talent and marketing and business development. So it's a very marketing and PR heavy space. So you would likely need to have someone doing a lot of that work for you. You'll have a vendor of sorts. So having a budget for marketing too.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see particularly with so many of our financial services clients, is they are not just coming here with a plan as to who's going to run the shop, who's going to deal with all the compliance, but actually who's going to lead that business development charge. And I think, again, speaking about misconceptions, there was this feeling that you could just bring someone from abroad who would hit the ground and just business develop. Actually, I think that there are far more cultural nuances that need to be addressed. And what we see now amongst our clients is a bit of a scramble to find the really hot talent already on the ground here. And with the opening up of Saudi Arabia and the wealth of opportunity that is emerging there, really, I think more than ever, there needs to be that local talent that can really, really represent these businesses from a slightly different cultural perspective.
Yeah, you need to have a team that reflects the environment you're in. So if you are say I'm an American, if I am building an American company here and I just have a staff of 10 and 7 of those 10 moved over from Denver or San Francisco or Boston, that's a terrible company. That's not the structure that you should have. You should have folks that maybe your accountant should have been here for a long time or whatever it might be. There was a company that I worked with a number of years ago, and the founder asked me, how do you say get to the point, but how would I say it in Arabic so they would like it better? And I was like, never say that again. I was like, don't ever say those words. Take it out of your vocabulary. And they were like, what do you mean? I was like, don't do that. Do not say get to the point, and certainly don't Google Translate get to the point in Arabic and try to say it out loud.
I think that that's a really interesting point on culture, actually, because what we've seen when we've sat down with regulators, for example, on behalf of clients who are coming here for the first time, is a real frustration from some clients about how slowly things can move, and a real frustration from others about how quickly maybe things are moving. And there's a certain cultural dance that one has to do, and this is the same for anywhere in the world. You've got to be cognizant of where you are. But so many companies think that they have a big name wherever they come from. They can just come to the region and plant exactly what they already grew. No, there's got to be some changes. But on the note of regulators, I mean, as a lawyer, I'm always looking at things through a legal and regulatory lens, and I'm always sort of thinking about what could be improved in order to help really grow that ecosystem and help more and more companies come to the region and really flourish. From your perspective, what do you think that the regulators or the authorities could do to improve things? And what do you think they've already been doing that has worked really well?
So in terms of what's worked really well, being so available to have conversation, I think is second to none, literally in the world. That opportunity for a company to have that conversation and have a real dialogue is invaluable. What I think needs to exist somewhere, whether it's within the regulator or maybe even a federal level, is an actual just checklist of what companies need to do and anticipating those steps. Yeah. I think that is something that will, because the private sector can do this. So, if Forbes in their Middle East magazine wants to publish, a checklist of like how to do this, that's awesome. Yeah. But that's a perspective from outside of the kind of where the buck ends group. There needs to be some type of very clear delineated path. I think that would make it a lot easier for a lot of companies, because there's going to be deviation points at every one of those boxes. And so it might be one box, but that one box might take 6 months and have 15 steps into it.
Yeah. I mean, so much of our job as lawyers is actually to help guide companies through those steps. And it's interesting, The Economist produces a sort of a comparative graph every year on the ease of doing business, and in particular, how easy it is to enter a particular market. And I always find that our region really comes quite high on the top of the country's most difficult to do business, most difficult to enter the market. And it's a pity, because there is a wealth of opportunity here, and people are ready to do business. We see that with the regulators here, unlike anywhere else in the world. But definitely there is still that opacity that needs to be dealt with. And certainly it's something that we help a lot of clients navigate, but it would be great if we could see a perhaps more joined up approach from the number of authorities and the number of regulators in the region.
Exactly.
But there were initiatives that you implemented during your time at ADIO that really encouraged businesses to come to the region. Can you talk a bit more about those?
Sure. So I think, in fairness, I think I was serving under leadership that were really plugged in and were able to empower these programs. So that was really a privilege to be able to be part of that team. I think the work that we did on the accelerator side really brought over 100 companies in 2.5 years. So there were the Angel Z companies, there were the Growth X and the Highway to 100 Unicorns program. And then there's the Amazon and AWS credit activity through Hub 71. So being able to look at numbers, think it's not always a numbers game, but you need to have, especially in venture and on the startup side, you're going to have a lot of companies that start, you're going to have a lot of companies that fail. That's just the nature of how these things work, and that's a good thing. Being able to have companies that come through and then don't thrive, but you have that founder that cares about the region and starts a new company, that's where we're going to start seeing a flywheel effect on the innovation ecosystem. So the in terms of incentives and programs that were equity free for the startups, I think that was where there was some success, especially with the partners we had.
Oh, brilliant. So I think we're drawing to a close, and we have a question for all of our interviewees, of which you are the first, and that is, what are your predictions? Sorry, I should say that again. What are your Okay. Okay.
Maybe you just start from the start again where you said.
Okay.
You know,
We're drawing
ask
to a
for-
close.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so unfortunately we're drawing to a close, and we have a question for all of our interviewees, of which you are the first, so also the first to answer this question. And that is, what are your predictions for the next 12 months in the region? I suppose yours might have a particular startup focus, but even some wider predictions would be most welcome.
Yeah, I think there is nothing but opportunity here. And I think the next year we'll see more venture groups from the US opening up offices here.
Yeah.
The past year was the first time. I have a number of friends from Miami that moved over, and they are setting up funds. So I think we're going to see a real growth in the number of venture capital funds that are open in the UAE with principals that are investing locally and regionally. Super, super excited for that.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see an increased talent pool of folks that are living, working, thriving in the UAE from abroad that want to be here, and especially with the non-dom actions in the UK, we're going to see a different kind of group of potential investors on that side. And overall, I think we're just going to see just growth in both Abu Dhabi, Ras Al Khaimah, Dubai, in terms of offerings, capacity, and just the number of people that are going to be here.
Yeah. So, Brittany, you mentioned that you are part of the team at the circuit and you have your own column, Plug In. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the circuit is something I would encourage everyone to subscribe to for the daily circuit. So it's kind of like the Politico daily briefings where it's very easy to read. It's on your phone. It's great. And so my column is specifically meant to be very practical advice for folks that are either interested in the region or maybe have come previously and things kind of died out and they're looking, now that there's so much attention across the GCC, how do we actually go through the processes of looking at maybe an accelerator, or what government agency should I speak with, or how do I go to GITEX and what do I do for follow-up? So I just had my second column published 2 days ago that was literally about follow-up for GITEX. And so my goal for this column is to make it easy for individuals or companies. So even in the column, I put in an email template for follow-up, right? Like, copy paste it, doctor it up the way you want to, but you have something to start from. So the series will then continue with just kind of an overview of what the difference is between a sovereign wealth fund, a venture capital group, a family office, an angel investor. There isn't really a resource right now like that, so I'm very excited to be able to provide just very practical, very easy, high-level information that will ideally make people's lives easier.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm looking forward to reading more.
So one of the questions I have for you is about the companies that you do work with. So if you are coming from abroad and you guys have a lot of advisory work that you do and navigating regulators, how would a company be able to find you and know you're the right team?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really difficult one for a lot of companies coming to the region for the first time. How do you find the right legal counsel, the right support? I mean, we can be found, we're pretty active on the likes of LinkedIn. We producing many articles to try and inform and educate about the ecosystems and the goings on here. We're also an international law firm headquartered in the UK, but with offices all over the world. So there are lots of tie-ins there, and I think that's really helpful for international companies to know that they have support in more than just one jurisdiction. But probably the easiest way for companies to reach us is to find me on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty responsive, so feel free to recommend anyone to reach out. Okay, all right, so one of my pet topics, and I think that it's really been a buzzword in the region now for a couple of years, is crypto. Have you worked with many virtual asset clients? Perhaps you can tell us a bit more about those that you have.
Yeah, I think that's one of the industries and clusters here that's going to see explosive growth over the next couple of years. There are a critical mass of companies, whether it's through Solana or through being regulated in ADGM. Hub 71 actually has a digital assets, both a working group, so for leaders to come together. They also have a market entry program for digital asset companies. So there's groups like Fuse that are doing a lot of really good work. And then Zebu is another company that I really like. They have a solid team here, like a couple dozen people, which is like a large team for a Web3 company. I think the companies, though, navigating the crypto market and the landscape is a little bit difficult. So, and finding attorneys is actually hard as well. So, are you guys working with crypto companies?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We had a hand in our last firm at setting up the Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority here, and indeed we do a huge amount of work with cryptocurrency companies and more broadly the blockchain and digital asset companies that support those crypto companies. I think lots of lawyers in the region are having a go at fintech, but to really call yourself a specialist is not easy to do that. And I think that that word shouldn't be thrown around too lightly, to be honest with you. I mean, we have a huge number of clients in the digital asset space who are looking for counsel with all parts of their business, but really requiring lawyers to have a deep understanding of how the technology works. And I think that is a real challenge for fintech lawyers to not just have an impeccable legal standard of advice, but also to really understand how these businesses work and how that technology works. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting growth areas that we will see in the region. I last night, quite late, was putting together a contract for a company in the blockchain space. Incredible, but some of the points were just so technical. I don't think that law school would have ever prepared me for this, or indeed much of my experience to date. So I think I personally spend a good hour or two of my day reading up on technological developments and general sort of corporate developments in that space, because I think if you don't, you fall behind.
100%. Yeah. And it makes a difference. I think there was a moment, after some of the undulation within the crypto space where like the term crypto was almost like a bad word, right?
Absolutely. And absolutely.
It doesn't always land that crypto could also represent a real world asset that's just being digitized or digitalized. Absolutely. It's an opportunity for inclusivity in economic space where historically there might not have been that access.
Absolutely. I was giving some presentations last week to banking clients in Saudi, and it was so interesting to see how some relatively basic concepts have just been spoken about in such a way that people almost feel like they can't ask, what does this really mean? And how does that really impact us? And how does that really affect us? And I think part of our job in our space is to educate, and not in a patronizing way, but simply because we are all students in this world. The technology is developing so fast. Anyone who claims to be, a complete expert probably isn't.
100%. There is nothing wrong with literally just saying, I don't understand. It's not a reflection of you as an individual or anything negative. And the other thing when it comes to startups, when we were doing pitch coaching, we would say that you need to be able to speak to a 3-year-old, a 30-year-old, and a 300-year-old. Everyone should be able to understand. If you can't describe your company in a way that's digestible to a layperson, then you might not know what your company does either.
Yeah.
And there's almost nothing that's too complex that an average person wouldn't be able to understand.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And actually, even in the legal space, we see a large number of lawyers using terribly convoluted language and, flowery acronyms for things. Actually, sometimes you just want to be told what this is in black and white.
Yes.
Obviously, you've done a lot of work with startups, and in particular, you've done quite a bit of work with universities in the US. Do you have any tips or advice for those straight out of university who are looking to get into the startup space, perhaps don't quite know where to begin, but would like to get in somehow?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is show up. So if you're fresh out of college or fresh into the region, go to everything. All of these events pretty much are free. And the biggest downside will be the taxi ride over. And if you're able to spend 2 or 3 hours with founders or with the leaders of these programs, that's a huge asset to you as an individual to build your own network and your own brand. And then companies always need help. So if you have a skill, whether it's social media or if maybe you're a math major and you have some hard skills to deliver, offer that to the founders. And there's always internships. And I know not getting paid for work is terrible, but if it's something that you can do, or then you can broadcast it and they could be a reference for you when you're looking for a job, that's something that also could be really helpful. So you would do a project, they're your reference, they help you find a full-time job. And then as that company grows, you have a really dynamic understanding of that business. You might be able to jump back into that business after they've raised a round.
Yeah, that's great advice. Brittany, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for appearing on our very first podcast episode. It's been a super engaging conversation. We could have stayed all day, but unfortunately we had to wrap it up. But we look forward to working with you again very soon.
Thank you. It has really been a delight. Congratulations on the podcast and much success.
Thank you.